What attracted you to Ron? And can you tell me about your sense, even then, that he was a bit of a dangerous man to know?
Well, I've always found that it's the mind of a man that is most sexy. He was not really terribly physically attractive. And he had a brilliant mind, no question about that. And he was very interesting. Never a dull moment with him. He was a wonderful raconteur. Ideas flowed from him constantly. And he was just a very interesting man and a complex personality. I didn't initially anticipate any danger or peculiarities about him to begin with, because he presented himself as a together individual, and only time and the nature of our relationship unfolded some of his idiosyncrasies.
And what were those? I remember you saying to me he was a very compelling and charismatic man, but also he was hypnotic in a way, and that it affected you. Can you describe some of those, that side of him?
Well, he was such an interesting individual. He had a very active mind, and he was really quite irresistible from that point of view. I remember telling my roommate at the time that I felt so much under his spell. This was later when I learned that there were some things about him that I did feel were rather dangerous. I felt so much under his spell that I told my roommate, if ever I told you I was going to marry this man, she should tie me up and not allow me out of the house.
So what was it you think that you sensed then when you said, tie me up, don't let me out of the house? What was it you were sensing?
Well, although he said to me at one time, we did quarrel a few times, and sometimes he would issue an implicit threat. And he said, well, I may just leave you free to marry some buttoned-down lawyer and live in a buttoned-up life in a ranch house in Beverly Hills. And I said, well, is it better for me to stay with a Sharpie, with a cool, which is a brand name, cigarette in his mouth and wings on his feet? And he certainly was mercurial in his moods, and I felt that he was an unstable individual, and I certainly wouldn't have any kind of a stable life with him.
What did he tell you about Sarah, or about his first wife or his family?
I didn't know a thing about his previous marriages, although later he did mention Polly. I thought at the time he was separated from Sara. Certainly at the time I met him, when he was out here in connection with Dianetics, which is when I met him, he was not living with Sara. Sara was in the East with Alexis. And I was under the impression he was separated. And he did talk about getting a divorce. So my expectation was that this was a man who was not a truly married man. And at the time, I did get the apartment for us to live in the Chateau Marmont. I surely thought this was a man who was interested in marrying me and whom I might be interested in marrying. And it was quite shocking when, shortly after moving some of my things into that apartment, suddenly Sara turned up with the baby and moved in. And I believe he was just as dismayed as I, because the next day when he came to the office with some of my belongings, like my cologne and my toothbrush and so forth, he looked very downtrodden and apologetic and not happy about the situation at all.
How did he behave to you once Sara moved back? I'm just picking this point up and we'll go back. Well,
the first thing he did is invite me to have dinner with the two of them, which I did. And of course Sara was quite hostile to me, and I don't know, I think perhaps Ron brought me along to hurt her or something. And that was really all. I had no contact with her, although subsequently I had to call him at home on a business matter. And I learned that the next day or that evening, Sara had made a suicide attempt, at least so Ron told me. And he somehow thought that in that telephone call I told her about our relationship, which I did not, ever. And why she made the suicide attempt, I really don't think it was over me. I don't know if she knew he was involved with me. Maybe he told her. But I certainly had nothing to do with it, and it resulted in a telegram from him firing me from the organization. And it was only later, when I ran into him accidentally, that I learned what had triggered the telegram. And I believe it was then, shortly after that, that I found I was working. I had to get a new job, of course. I was working in a radio station on a program called Books and People, in which I was lining up authors. And as I was in the studio, who should come by but Mr. Hubbard, on a totally different matter, to be interviewed on another show.
I'm just going to have to stop you there because you're getting ahead to the next phase.
Oh,
I've got
all
some
right.
questions on this one.
Surely.
But just so that we're clear, on that evening when he invited you round to meet Sarah and Alexis, how did he introduce you? Who did he say you were?
Well, I was an employee of the organization. No, I didn't go to dinner at his house. We went out to dinner, so I didn't meet Alexis. We went out to dinner. But I was his public relations representative. And the job that I was hired to do was to answer all the scurrilous attacks that the press was making on him at the time and responding to them in writing, because I was a writer. And I had the feeling my job was to sell the least popular, it was in the 50s, the least popular product in America, next to communism. And I was busy, we had a clipping service, and I was busy answering all these columnists and responding to Walter Winchell and so on and so forth, and that was my job.
And did he ever mention his first wife or the children he had with his first wife?
Never, no, I did no thing about it.
Now, when you were alone together, and you obviously knew a different man than the man who was on stage giving demonstrations and everything else, what was he like?
Well, he was a lot of fun when he was in a good mood. He had a wonderful sense of humor. And most of the time, he was just his usual charming self.
What hopes or ambitions did he have that he told you about? He had grand schemes, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He talked about smashing his way into history and hoping to found a religion. And he really saw himself as someone chosen by destiny to do something quite grand.
Now, just remembering, looking through your diary there's instances talking about you being his Antony and Cleopatra and things like that. Can you talk about some of those ideas, how he saw himself as wanting to conquer the world? I mean, it's very...
Yes, he did want to conquer. He said he wanted to conquer the world by idea. And I think it's really quite remarkable that a man who's had these megalomaniac fantasies was able to achieve them. There are lots of people who have those fantasies, but not everyone makes them come true. And he was able to do that, which I think is quite remarkable. He told me that, this was after one of our quarrels, in which I sometimes thought about leaving him because I saw him as a very unstable individual. And he would make an implicit threat like, you need me because you are a Cleopatra, Marie Antoinette, and you must have a Caesar or an Alexander. And I remember once saying to him, well, I think you need me more than I need you. And I remember a pause, and then he said that was very unwise. And I think I got fired a second time. Oh, no, no, that wasn't a firing. I think I was not working then. He sent me a wire the following morning and said, I think you had better forget about me and the foundation. And but that didn't last either, because somehow we were reunited again.
So what was it, the fact that you said that you need me, what was the problem there?
The problem was that it was the truth. And it really didn't fit in with his sort of grandiose self-perception as someone who was very special and didn't need anyone. And certainly, as I understand it, the heroes in his novels were people like himself, or as he perceived himself, lonely, solitary, aristocratic leaders. who had great power and used that power for the good of humanity. That's what he really hoped to do.
So Barbara, I know you shared a great interest in psychology and the workings of the mind, and shared that out with Ron. Had he researched the subject deeply himself?
No, he hadn't. He told me that the only book he ever read on psychology, and he sought out this book before he wrote Dianetics, because he wanted to know what had been done before. He got one book from the library. He had asked the librarian for a book that would bring him up to date on present psychological theories and everything that had been done. That's the only book he ever read, he told me.
So did he rely on you then? Did you talk about that sort of area a lot?
Well, we talked about lots of things. I mean, we talked about, yes, we talked about that. I at that time had read a lot of psychology and philosophy. I think I spent most of my adolescent years reading. And I certainly was well grounded in Freud. We batted ideas back and forth about a lot of different things all the time. That's what made our time together so interesting.
Now, one of the other areas that I think you mentioned to me about is that you had a mutual interest in was the occult. What sort of things did you share in that area? Because I know he knew a lot about that, didn't he?
Well, he probably knew more than I did. I just had a mild interest in it. I'd read some books on it, but I certainly was not an expert on it. I had read Madame Blavatsky, and I became quite interested in the teachings of theosophy. I can't remember whether he was familiar with her teachings or not, but we discussed all kinds of things.
But was that a thing that he was interested in? Because there was, certainly in the 40s, he seemed to have experimented in a number of ways.
Yes, and I think some of these mutual interests are exactly what fueled our conversations together.
A lot of people tell us that he was also a great storyteller and used to tell tall tales about his past. How honest was he with you about his past? For example, about his university career, his war record, and things like that?
Well, he told me, I don't know whether what he told me, how much truth there was. I had the feeling he was telling me the truth. He told me he had not ever graduated from prep school, where his parents sent him. He told me that he enrolled at George Washington University in the engineering field, and even though he did not have his degree from secondary school, he got in on the basis of an Otis intelligence test. And he said he read Black's Physics 15 times and apparently passed a physics course. So that sounded reasonable.
He didn't ever graduate, did he, from university?
No, he didn't. Mm-hmm.
Did he tell you anything about the war? His experts in the war?
Well, he told me he had been in it. It's kind of hard for me to remember everything he told me. I remember writing things down. My diary has a lot of that information, but I really can't tell you off the top of my head.
That's all right then. Let's then move on now to when you did get back together. This is after you've met at the radio station. And so I guess we're around about the beginning of 51-ish, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
To the point. Did you know about Sarah and Miles Hollister then? Did you know about what was happening?
I don't think I did. I knew Miles. I did not know until after the fact that when he left Palm Springs, because he had a feeling things were not right back in Los Angeles, and he was quite right. Reconstructed, it seems that after he left Palm Springs, he stopped by Sarah's apartment and found Miles with her and told me that they were planning to commit him to an institution, and that's when the kidnapping took place.
Well, just talk about what he was like in Palm Springs, because you saw him then, didn't you? Tell me what he was like. He wasn't well, was he?
Well, he called me from Palm Springs, or wired me, I forget which, and told me he hadn't been well, and he felt like his good luck piece was missing, and asked me to come down. He had a house down there. And I did, and he was certainly very depressed. He had lost the color in his face. His voice was hardly audible. He was clearly going through clinical depression. And the way I tried, and he was sleeping a great deal and playing and improvising concertos on the piano. And he told me that he was totally blocked. He was working under a publisher's deadline, which he was failing to meet. And in fact, he had promised his publisher, I think he said, a book a month, which I guess, having been experienced as a pulp writer, may not have been that difficult for him to set as a goal for himself. But he could not. He said the publicity was already out on the new book, and he just couldn't get to it. So, acting more or less intuitively, I suggested to him that he sit at the dining room table, and I laid out a piece of butcher paper, and I was kind of, I think, desensitizing him to the task of writing as one deals with a phobia of any kind, where you approach the noxious stimulus gradually, bit by bit. And I told him, in order to reduce the pressure he felt, which was probably causing his block, to just sit at the paper, and if he didn't feel like writing, okay, and if he only felt like writing one word, that's okay too. So he was willing to do that. And we did that, I think, 3 times the first day in which he was unable to do anything, and he complained of severe somatic symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, all the symptoms of severe anxiety. And but the second day, he said he can't do it, and he was getting very discouraged, and he was going to get up. And I said, why don't you just write down there what you're feeling? And he hesitated a moment, and he wrote the word apathy. And that was the key to opening the lock, which started the tone chart, which became the Science of Survival book, which was the foundation for Scientology. And he completed the tone chart while I was there and became very energetic again and worked very hard, usually until easily 5 o'clock in the morning every single night. And by the end of the week, he was going full steam, and he was his old self again. And we had a lot of talking back and forth about ideas, and had a lot of fun horsing around, and he was just a lot of fun to be with again.
Just describe to me his state of paranoia at that time, and what it was he thought people were doing to him.
Well, he was running engrams with Dick DeMille, and was pretty much sharing what he was running with me, and he believed that his inability to write was due to the sinister interventions of other people, such as Sara hypnotizing him in his sleep and telling him he will never write again, and people he was involved with in the East, like Arthur Ceppos, I think was his publisher, injecting a hypodermic into a glass of milk, saying that that didn't make sense because his publisher would want him to write. So I don't know. But when he mentioned that milk, in his usual charming way, he'd look up at me and said, "And you know I always like a glass of milk." So he had this kind of almost childlike innocence, really, about him as well, which was also very charming.
Now, you came back from Palm Springs, and as you say, you confronted Sara and Hollister. What was Hollister like?
He was very good-looking and articulate and intelligent, and that's really all I can tell you about him.
Now, there was a terrible tussle between Sara and Ron over the divorce, wasn't there? Do you know what it was all about? What was it he feared about her that she might do?
Well, I think he was afraid of, I don't know, perhaps scandal that might hurt the foundation. Perhaps that was it. Well, later I learned that after he left Palm Springs, when he said he had the feeling that something was wrong back in Los Angeles, that they were planning to commit him to an institution. That I found out later.
But they were a mental institution, you mean?
Yes.
And so And so do you think that's why he then behaved, because he kidnapped the baby and...
Yes, I think he felt he had to escape. People were trying to do things to him. So sometimes, maybe this paranoia was justified.
Did he have a real fear of psychiatrists and things like that, even at that time?
Yes, he always expressed a fear and a hatred of them, and I thought it was due to the fact that they were making fun of Dianetics,
He kidnapped Alexis, the baby. Do you think he was really interested in looking after Alexis, or was this just a way of getting at Sara, do you think?
I think that he didn't want the child taken from him. Maybe it was a way of getting at Sara, and maybe using the child as some sort of bargaining chip. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, when he was at that stage, and he was dealing with the divorce, what was he like then? Was he still up as he had been when he left Palm Springs?
Well, I didn't see him for a while after that. After he left Palm Springs and went through this whole thing with Sara, I didn't see him for quite a while. I believe after that he went to Cuba, if I'm not mistaken, went to Havana. And the next time I heard from him was from Wichita.
Right, I'm just going to come on to Wichita then. So let's pick up when we're into Wichita. Tell me about what happened when he called you wired you from Wichita, and what the state he was in, and what he asked you to do.
Well, at first there was some requests to do some business matters, take care of some business matters for him in connection with the divorce, and then he sent me a wire telling me he'd been very ill, and asked me if I would come, and said he wanted to marry me. And I really wasn't considering marriage at that time because I sort of knew what was going on. And but I did go because I thought if I could help him, this is what I wanted to do. I'd brought him out of a depression before. I thought perhaps I could do it again. And when I went to Wichita, he looked terrible. He had hair down to his shoulders, and fingernails were like talons. And again, he was like I had met him in Palm Springs, and clearly depressed, looked like he had tears in his eyes. And I found a note, a very sweet note in my hotel room saying, "Glad you're here, I love you." And it seemed that he, again, didn't have any money. This was true while he was in Dianetics, too. The man didn't have a penny in his pocket, which always amazed me. Because here was Dianetics at the top of the charts, and he had a successful foundation for a while, and he never had any money. And that was because I found out that all the royalties were being funneled through the foundation. And I remember, if I can go back a little bit, that when things were particularly tough and he complained he didn't have any money even to get a haircut, I said, well, what you really need are more students for the foundation. And I went down to the Times, and out of my own pocket, I paid for an ad for students to come. And I don't think it worked very well, and that didn't happen. But to Wichita. He didn't have any money then either. And he was totally living on handouts.
What was his mental state like? How ill was he?
He was extremely depressed again, extremely depressed. And living on handouts from this very wealthy oil man that he was living with. And I don't know why I let this happen. I guess I was under his spell again, but we did go out to buy an engagement ring for me, which he wanted to do. And he had just enough money in his pocket. He paid cash, so I know he had no checking account or anything like that. And I guess he came with that money in his pocket with the intention of buying me an engagement ring, and he bought me an engagement ring.
But you didn't marry him. Why not?
Well, I saw that I had a man there who had no prospects, for one thing, and that he had some psychiatric difficulties, and I didn't see much of a life for myself with that sort of individual. So I left.
Did you presume you also knew, because you would have read in the papers some of the things that Sara had said about him, because that was public, wasn't it?
Yes.
Did that concern you? Did you have worries about all of that that had come out?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did any of that ring true from your own experience of him?
You mean the psychiatric?
Yes, and some
yeah.
of the things that he was meant to have done.
Yes,
maybe
yes,
temper and-
yes, yes. Well, I found him paranoid, you know, not only manic depressive, but certainly paranoid. And yes, he was capable of being cruel. I remember one of the poems that I wrote to him during this period was, when you are cruel, I suffer, not because you are cruel, but because you are cruel, because you suffer. So I did understand, and I think the fact that I understood what was happening with him, I felt a great deal of compassion as well as caring, is what made me hang in there, you know, because I did feel this compassion and caring both for
But
him.
to sum up, what was the problem with his personality, do you think?
Well, I think he had what we would call a narcissistic personality. He was manic depressive, and certainly paranoid. So as I said, he was a complex personality. But that's what made him so fascinating. People who are totally well-adjusted really aren't very interesting. Not to me, anyway. Maybe that's why I became a psychologist.
Now, many, many years later, you got in touch with him again. Tell me about that and his reaction to it.
Somebody from the organization contacted me and said, Ron is very ill and I think he would like to hear from you, and gave me his address, which I didn't have before. So I wrote to him just to make sure he was really there and perhaps was receptive to hearing from me, and I got a letter, very nice letter back from him. And then I decided to send him my poems that I had never sent to him. I have about 15 poems, which I wrote during our relationship, and probably is among the best poetry I've written, although I've never shared it. It did not appear in the chapbook that I had come out a couple of years ago. And when I sent them to him with a letter designed to make him smile, I got a note of appreciation back from him in which he said, thank you for those wonderful papers. So I was very happy about that.
And just to sum up with him, just sum him up for me as a man, and in the way that you feel that he was perhaps misunderstood, I think, by others.
Well, he was not a demon and he wasn't a deity. He was a man with some psychiatric problems, which led him to try to find some kind of way of dealing with his problems without going to a psychiatrist. And because of his own quest to help himself, he was able to help many people. And I hope this indicates that people with psychiatric disabilities should not be put down because of the disability,